Let's talk to Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP. Tom, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Shall we kick off with Nigel Farage? I mean, people are quite surprised, expressing surprise, that this young woman has thrown a milkshake over Nigel Farage, who was, I think, campaigning at the time. I don't think he'd actually been elected as an MP. It was shortly before the election. I mean, you know, as Peter Blexley was telling me, when you get something like that thrown over you, it could be anything. It could be really dangerous. You might suffer permanent damage, life-changing injuries. And yet this sentence, I would say, doesn't kind of make anybody think it's not something worth doing.
That's true, and I also think that there's, you know, we're living in a climate at the moment where, you know, in the last 5 or 6 years, you know, there's been 2 members of Parliament, you know, brutally murdered.
Yeah.
David Amess and Joe Cox as well. So I think it's incredibly important there is sort of zero tolerance towards this kind of violence towards elected politicians, because, you know, yes, you know, Nigel Farage is you know, he's an individual. He's a British citizen. He doesn't deserve to be attacked. Nobody does. But he was also, I mean, yes, he wasn't an MP at the time, but he's a very high-profile political figure, media figure, and it really does, I think, have a chilling effect for our democracy when, you know, regardless of our views about somebody's political affiliations or views, they can't go about their business of communicating their politics, communicating their views without this risk. So I think, you know, it's a classic example where you need to lay down a marker and say these sorts of attacks, it's not just an attack on Nigel Farage, it's an attack on all of us, it's an attack on our shared democracy. So this is a great opportunity, you know, for the judge to send that message out. And he did it in 2019 when Jeremy Corbyn threw an egg at somebody and that individual served time.
Yes.
I don't understand why in this case the lady hasn't.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, does it? And it does lead people to perceive that there is a two-tier system, and I think that's obviously a bad thing. Let's talk about democracy, though, because yesterday Harriet Harman accused reform of being a danger to democracy. Today we've got Angela Rayner announcing yesterday in her devolution revolution that they might be doing away with some local elections coming up in May because they're rewiring the way that Britain is kind of managed, if you like, by different local authorities.
Well, this is actually this is a tricky one, because I actually think one of the things they're doing is they're moving away from having 2-tier local councils to having unitary councils. You know, and actually generally I think that's a good thing. I think there probably are too many councillors. I think there is confusion in areas where you've got one council that do your waste, another council do the highways. So actually I think having unitary, where you just have one council, I think there's benefits in terms for taxpayers, more streamlined. And actually, it's probably better for democracy and better for accountability, because you're more likely to know who your one councillor is when you're 2 doing slightly different things. So in terms of this point about the election, though, well, you know, would it be the best thing to have the elections next May and then just do it all again in 2026? Because it's going to take over a year to make all the decisions about these new councils. So I have a little bit of sympathy, because, you know, it kind of makes me think that if the councils were in May, if we had elections in May 2025 and the same councils up in May 2026, you'd probably have a whole load of people complaining about waste of money and taxpayers' money and all that. So whilst so on this one, I've got some sympathy. However, I can also see the view that Labour aren't incredibly popular at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, timing is everything, isn't it, Tom? And the fact is that everybody knew, and certainly Reform were not happy, because they knew that they would be running an awful lot of local councillors into potential seats that they would win from Labour, and it begins to look as though, you know, the timing of this is such that that won't happen because there won't actually be elections. And I take your point, but only really if it works, because, you know, I've never yet seen any shake-up of any local authority business or any state-run business which results in fewer people being employed, or less money being spent, or less taxpayers' money being charged to taxpayers. You know, there's talk of council tax going up, not down. So if they are going to, you know, make this better for people and more efficient for people, are they going to be, you know, sacking loads of people? Are they going to be letting people go? I very, very much doubt it.
Well, look, Mike, you know that I don't shy away from laying into Keir Starmer and laying into the Labour Party, and I'm very happy to do that on most issues. On this one, I mean, look, they generally make a dog's dinner of everything they touch, so they probably will bastardise what we're talking about doing with local government. But the general principle of, cutting the number of councillors, making local government more streamlined, I think is a good idea. When I was
as long as they do it, though.
Well, as long as they do it. But when I was an MP for Ipswich, Ipswich had a borough council, a county council. They kept the two different councils kept on passing the buck. No one ever knew what was responsible for what. I didn't think it was a good thing. And I remember when I was a district councillor in Cambridgeshire, and I would knock on people's doors, and then they'd start talking to me about potholes, and I'd be like, well, actually, technically, you can talk to me about waste and planning, and the city centre, but actually potholes are somebody else's responsibility. Yeah. It's quite difficult for your average punter to get their head around some of the complexities of local government. So I think simplifying it, making it sort of the one-stop shop, so you've got one councillor who you go to on all issues, and actually the other council can't blame the other one. I actually think there's advantages to it. But yeah, I can understand it's not ideal. You've got councillors serving 5-year terms. Yeah. Reform obviously want to get cracking, but look, they'll have plenty of opportunities and by-elections and other things.
But we'll come back to this, I'm sure, over time when the details become more clear. But it's not that clear at the moment from what Angela Rayner's been saying or what anybody else in Labour's been saying, which elections might be cancelled, whether they're all going to be cancelled, whether some are going to be cancelled. It's just not very clear, is it?
Well, it's not, and I have to say, I knew this devolution white paper was being published yesterday. And as somebody who used to work in the devolved authority, I have a bit of an interest in this area. And it was, I was hearing there might be a new mayor covering Norfolk and Suffolk, and so I'm quite interested. But I read this white paper and I couldn't really figure out what was going on.
Well, that's the trouble.
It just seemed to be a lot of gobbledygook for the white paper. It didn't really specify anything. And then it was sort of this vague comment where it's like, oh, maybe there might not be some elections, and people kind of need to know. I mean, I know that in Ipswich, for example, they've selected all their county council candidates ahead of the election next May, expecting there's going to be elections. But all of a sudden, they're a bit like, well, was this all a waste of time because we're gonna have elections a year later? So that either way. May isn't that long away.
No, it's really not. So, if you were putting together a campaign, you'd be doing it now, wouldn't you?
Yeah, the vagueness of the minister when he was asked about it yesterday, that needs to stop. They need to let people know if they are going to cancel elections next May, and there's a good reason for it, they need to just say that. But at the moment, we're kind of in a situation where nobody knows what's going on. That white paper yesterday was meant to provide a high degree of certainty about what's happening, but it hasn't done. If anything, it's made people more uncertain and more anxious about what's happening. Yeah. So somebody in the government needs to grip it, let people know, let different councillors, council candidates, councils know what's going on.
Absolutely right. Bit of breaking news for you, Tom. The rate of UK unemployment remained unchanged at 4.3% in the 3 months to October. That's about 1.5 million people. About a quarter, though, of the working age population aged 16 to 64 are still economically inactive, and that is about 11 million people. This is a massive problem, and I'm not going to pretend that some of it wasn't caused by the complicated, shall we say, benefit system. Economically inactive means people who are not currently employed and are not actively seeking work. So, it's an awful lot of people, isn't it? We're always talking about, why immigration is needed to fill certain jobs that nobody in Britain wants to do. But somebody's got to do something about these 11 million people, surely.
Yeah, and it was made worse by the pandemic, and a lot of the good stuff that had happened in welfare was knocked off course by the impact of the pandemic, and we haven't really recovered. Yeah. But you're right. The two things are linked. The fact that we've got record levels of net migration. Net migration of almost 1 million, whilst at the same time we have millions of people out of work. And of course, some of those people who are economically inactive will be, generally just can't work. There'll be people with serious disabilities or illnesses. But a massive chunk of that 11 million are people who will be able to work, who are deciding not to work. Yeah. So, you will not be able to adequately deal with people's concerns in immigration. And fairly dramatic cuts to net migration. Really driving it down. You will not be able to do that without major reform to welfare. So again, this it will have to fall to a leader who is prepared to grasp the nettle, make really difficult decisions. But look, the chances of Keir Starmer doing that are nigh on impossible. He will not be prepared to do that.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Listen, we've got to run. Tom, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP there.